How's it going, guys? Good morning. Welcome to week number 4, lesson number 8 for The Call of the Wild by Jack London. Let's dive right in. Last we left off, we were still on chapter 5, The Toil of Trace and Trail, right after Buck was given to his new owners, which are 2 men, Hal and Charles, and 1 woman, Mercedes. And I think it's that Hal is Mercedes's husband and Charles is her brother, and maybe it'll be the other way around. Sorry, but one of the men is her husband and one is her brother, and they are going on some sort of a trek. We know not what trek yet, but we know that they certainly don't seem to belong in the Yukon area. They're not extraordinarily fit to be doing this kind of a journey, and they don't seem to know how to work with the dogs and how to work with their pack load, as is described by a couple of men who step out of their tent and call the group out for some of the foolish things that they're doing. We left off on, for me, page 52, right as they're getting to go. And if you want to follow along, feel free to go to the video description below and click the little link that's in there, and that link should take you to the book. When the book is open, you can type in Control F and type "The dogs sprang against the breastbands." Breastbands being one word. Okay? And that should take you directly to the spot that we're at. So we'll pick up there, we'll do a little reading, and then we'll talk about homework towards the end. All right. Mush, he shouted, mush on there. The dogs sprang against the breastbands, strained hard for a few moments, then relaxed. They were unable to move the sled. The lazy brutes, I'll show 'em, he cried, preparing to lash out at them with the whip. But Mercedes interfered, crying, oh, Hal, you mustn't, as she caught hold of the whip and wrenched it from him. The poor dears, now you must promise you won't be harsh with them for the rest of the trip, or I won't go a step. Precious lot you know about dogs, her brother sneered, and I wish you'd leave me alone. They're lazy, I tell you, and you've got to whip them to get anything out of them. That's their way. You ask anyone. Ask one of these men. Mercedes looked at the men imploringly, untold repugnance at the sight of pain written in her pretty face. They're weak as water, and if you want to know, came the reply from one of the men, plumb tuckered out. That's what's the matter. They need a rest. Rest be blanked, said Hal with his beardless lips, but Mercedes said, oh, in pain and sorrow at the oath. But she was a clannish creature, and rushed at once to the defense of her brother. Never mind that man, she said pointedly. You're driving our dogs, and you can do what you think is best with them. Again, Hal's whip fell upon the dogs. They threw themselves against the breastbands, dug their feet into the packed snow, got down low to it, and put forth all their strength. The sled held as though it were an anchor. After 2 efforts, they stood still, panting. The whip was whistling savagely, when once more Mercedes interfered. She dropped on her knees before Buck, with tears in her eyes, and put her arms around his neck. You poor, poor dears, she cried sympathetically. Why don't you pull hard? Then you wouldn't be whipped. Buck did not like her, but he was feeling too miserable to resist her, taking it as part of the day's miserable work. One of the onlookers, who had been clenching his teeth to suppress hot speech, now spoke up. It's not that I care a whoop what becomes of you, but for the dogs' sakes, I just want to tell you you can help them a mighty lot by breaking out that sled. The runners are froze fast. Throw your weight against the G-pole right and left and break it out. A 3rd time the attempt was made, but this time, following the advice, Hal broke out the runners which had been frozen to the snow. The overloaded and unwieldy sled forged ahead, Buck and his mates struggling frantically under the rain of blows. 100 yards ahead, the path turned and sloped steeply into the main street. It would have required an experienced man to keep the top-heavy sled upright, and Hal was not such an experienced man. As they swung on the turn, the sled went over, spilling half its load through the loose lashings. The dogs never stopped. The lightning sled bounded on its side behind them. They were angry because of the ill treatment they had received and the unjust load. Buck was raging. He broke into a run, the team following his lead. Hal cried, whoa, whoa, but they gave no heed. He tripped and was pulled off of his feet. The capsized sled ground over him, and the dogs dashed up the street, adding to the gaiety of Skagway as they scattered the remainder of the outfit along its chief thoroughfare. So, guys, right here, I just want to talk briefly about a symbol that Jack London is bringing to us. We've been engrossed in the far north world for some time now with Buck, and in that world, we haven't talked much about the materials that Francois and Perrault or that the Scottish man brought along with them. The reason being, it was just natural for travelers in that area to pack lightly. They took what they needed and nothing else. And if they could hunt for food while they were on the trail, they did just that. If they could buy necessities at each new stop, only the bare necessities to get by, that's what they did. This was natural for this kind of environment. By pointing out and paying attention to the large pack load and the cumbersome pack load that wasn't packed well by Hal, Charles, and Mercedes, Jack London is not just showing us how ridiculous these guys look, but also making a symbol of that pack. I think that symbol lies in the idea that civilization has no place here. That in the wild, as you venture further and further, you take less and less of civilized society with you. You don't need a perfect tent, especially in springtime. You don't need all of the pots and pans. Maybe just one will do. And this is something that these civilized people, Hal, Charles, and Mercedes, they don't seem to realize because they're not truly one with the wild. And Jack London is using this stark dichotomy between those normal wild men and these out-of-place people to make this symbol larger than life. And it's funny that when the dogs cast all of these things off of the sled, they seem to be able to run around and have fun. Again, probably a testament to the joy of the wild. Once you leave all of your material belongings behind you, you're able to just run free without all of that weight, right? So that transfers from being literal to being metaphysical. This idea that when we, even in our normal civilized society, get rid of the weight that's holding us down, whether that weight is cell phones or caring too much about clothes or cars or other material items, once we let that stuff go, we're free to run and be more true to our wild, natural selves. It's kind of an interesting point that Jack London is trying to slip in there really subtly. Kind-hearted citizens caught the dogs and gathered up the scattered belongings. Also, they gave advice. Half the load and twice the dogs, if those men ever expected to reach Dawson, was what was said. Hal and his sister and brother-in-law listened unwillingly, pitched tent, and overhauled the outfit. Canned goods were turned out that made men laugh, for canned goods on the long trail are a thing to dream about. Blankets for a hotel, quoth one of the men who laughed and helped. Half as many is too much, get rid of them. Throw away that tent, and all those dishes. Who's going to wash them anyway? Good Lord, do you think you're traveling on a Pullman? And so it went, the inexorable elimination of the superfluous. Sorry, it was hard to get that word out. So superfluous, if you want to look that word up, which apparently I have trouble saying, it means extra things that are unneeded. Again, pointing out that idea, that symbol, that the material belongings of civilized society, not only do they not have a place in the wild, but they really hold you down. Mercedes cried when her clothes bags were dumped on the ground and article after article was thrown out. She cried in general, and she cried in particular over each discarded thing. She clasped hands about knees, rocking back and forth brokenheartedly. She averred she wouldn't go not an inch, not for a dozen Charleses. She appealed to everyone and to everything, finally wiping her eyes and proceeding to cast out even articles of apparel that were imperative necessities. And in her zeal, when she had finished with her own, she attacked the belongings of her men and went through them like a tornado. This accomplished, the outfit, though cut in half, was still a formidable bulk. Charles and Hal went out in the evening and bought 6 outside dogs. These, added to the 6 of the original team, and Teek and Kuno, the huskies obtained at the Rink Rapids on the record trip, brought the team up to a total of 14. But the outside dogs, though practically broken in since their landing, did not amount to much. 3 were short-haired pointers, 1 was a Newfoundland, and the other 2 were mongrels of an intermediate breed. They did not seem to know anything, these newcomers. Buck and his comrades looked upon them with disgust, and though he speedily taught them their places and what not to do, he could not really teach them what to do. They did not take kindly to trace and trail. With the exception of the 2 mongrels, they were bewildered and spirit-broken by the strange, savage environment in which they found themselves, and by the ill treatment by which they received. The 2 mongrels were without spirit at all. Bones were the only things breakable about them. The newcomers hopeless and forlorn, and the old team worn out by 2,500 miles of continuous trail, the outlook was anything but bright. The 2 men, however, were quite cheerful. They were proud, too. They were doing the thing in style with 14 dogs. They had seen other sleds depart over the pass for Dawson or come in from Dawson, but never had they seen a sled with so many as 14 dogs. In the nature of Arctic travel, there was a reason why 14 dogs should not drag one sled, and that was that one sled could not carry the food for 14 dogs. But Charles and Hal did not know this. They had worked the trip out with a pencil. So much to a dog, so many days, QED. Mercedes looked over their shoulders and nodded comprehensively. It was all so very simple to them. Late next morning, Buck led the long team up the street. There was nothing lively about it, no snap or go in him and his fellows. They were starting dead weary. 4 times he had covered the distance between Saltwater and Dawson, and the knowledge that, jaded and tired, he was facing the same trail once more made him bitter. His heart was not in the work, nor was the heart of any dog. The outsides were timid and frightened, the insides without confidence in their masters. Buck felt vaguely that there was no depending upon these 2 men and the woman. They did not know how to do anything, and as the days went by, it became apparent that they could not learn. They were slack in all things, without order or discipline. It took them half the night to pitch a slovenly camp, and half the morning to break that camp and get the sled loaded and fashioned so slovenly that for the rest of the day they were occupied in stopping and rearranging the load over and over again. Some days they did not make it 10 miles. On other days they were unable to get started at all, and on no day did they succeed in making more than half the distance used by the men as a basis in their dog food computation. It was inevitable that they should go short on dog food, but they hastened it by overfeeding, bringing the day nearer when underfeeding would commence. The outside dogs, whose digestions had not been trained by chronic famine to make the most of little, had voracious appetites, and when, in addition to this, the worn-out huskies pulled weakly, Hal decided that the orthodox ration was too small. He doubled it. And to cap it all, when Mercedes, with tears in her pretty eyes and a quaver in her throat, could not cajole him into giving the dogs still more, she stole it from the fish sacks and fed them slyly. But it was not food that Buck and the huskies needed. It was rest. And though they were making poor time, the heavy load they dragged sapped their strength severely. Okay, we're going to stop there for today, just a brief reading. Now, for homework, I want you to finish the rest of this chapter. So that'll take you all the way up to chapter 7, as far as I know. Let me just double check here. Nope, we're almost at the end of this chapter. Where's 6 at? To chapter 6, For the Love of Man. So you've got a little bit of reading left. Online, this should amount to a couple of scroll downs, but not too much. When you finish the reading, I don't want you to write a summary or anything like that. Instead, the way I found a symbol in the overpacked sled and the material belongings, I would like for you to find a symbol in the remaining reading. Find that symbol, tell me what that item or person or animal or environment or idea symbolizes. Okay, what is it a symbol for? Is it a symbol for happiness or sadness? Is it a symbol for freedom? Is it a symbol for just another material object? Is it a symbol for love or friendship or hate or conflict? Go ahead and find whatever that thing symbolizes and tell me about it. So what does it symbolize and why? And for those of you who are heading off to college next year or just want a little extra work in order to continue honing those skills, you can not only tell me what the thing symbolizes and why, but you can go a little farther on to tell me how that symbol functions in our real world. Okay, so for example, when I did it with the sled, I said all of the things that are packed onto the sled and all the superfluous material, I said it right that time, that is on the sled, it symbolizes the material goods of civilization. And the fact that the dogs are being held down by all of those goods symbolizes the way that we are held down by the material goods in our lives. And that if we want to become more wild and more true to who we are in nature, then we need to let those things go. Way more so than Hal, Charles, and Mercedes have seemed to. Okay, great. So if you have any questions about the homework, feel free to pop onto my Zoom call any Monday, Wednesday, or Friday from 8:30 to 9 a.m. or from 2 to 2:30 p.m. And you can also email me with any questions. I'm glad you guys have been watching the videos. Keep doing that to get entered into that $25 gift card drawing. And if I don't see you on Zoom, I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Bye, guys.